Okay. All right. Well, boy, there's a lot going on. I don't know if you've been watching that stuff in Ukraine or not, but I watched today. I don't know if you saw it or how many people saw it, but there was a car and a tank coming down the road. The only two cars on the road, or one car and one tank. And that tank crossed three lanes to run over the top of that car. And miraculously, I couldn't tell if it was a little old man or a little old woman laid down in the seat, but they survived it, it looked like. But man, when the world sees that, that's a war crime. I mean, that is a crime against humanity, and they're not supposed to target civilians. And obviously, that little old man or little old lady was obviously not a soldier. And if there's any justice to this war, that whoever that tank driver was will be hung, because that is a war crime for sure. But I bet there's a lot of that going on. Russia's pretty brutal. When they do go to war, they're brutal. And they don't mind hitting an orphanage or a hospital. They don't, it's no big deal. But anyway, I'm going to stick to my guns. I think this year is going to get crazy, crazy. And I hate to say it and I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's going to get worse. And this whole thing may blow up. Russia's reason for invading Ukraine is that they're worried about Ukraine making nuclear weapons and they're going to take them out before they do it. Well, that just gave a green light to Israel to go after Iran. If Russia can do it, so can Israel. And I think, if that's there's a lot of people don't want neighbors to have a nuclear weapon. And so, hey, Jerry, you made it, huh? We're just getting started, but I think it's just going to be us today. Linda's on her way back from Iowa, and we're just talking about stuff going on in Russia or Ukraine right now. But and in the world, I don't know. I've got mixed emotions about Gog and Magog, whether or not, there's definitely a Gog and Magog at the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign in Revelation. But I don't know if that's the same Gog and Magog. I could argue it both ways, whether Ezekiel's Gog and Magog is the same one in Revelation. And I don't think they are. I think they're the same place. But if they are two separate events, then we could be getting close to, Yah says he's going to put a hook in the mouth of the leader of Gog and force him bring him into a war with Israel. And, this could be the spark that ignites that. I don't know. And I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying it's probably going to get hot over there. Russia's already said that that they don't want Finland or I heard Sweden, but that don't make sense to join NATO. But I know some of the other smaller old Soviet countries, they don't want any of them joining NATO. And I think they're going to fast track them through just to keep Russia off of them. And that's liable to escalate it, if they do that. I heard just a minute ago, I just saw that they had shut down the central bank for Russia. And so anyway, that's liable to, I don't know, it's liable to escalate. But anyway, where did that little rag go, babe, from my glasses? Right there. Excuse my reach. Okay, well, we're going to get into Romans chapter 9. And I've been anxious to do this one. Here's where he really starts talking about the house of Israel and the things that are coming. And he's starting to quote scriptures about the house of Israel and talking about the promises to the house of Israel. Can you hear me all right, Jerry? Okay. Well, we're just getting started. We're a little bit late. I'll wait for Michelle to come back and we'll get into it. How you been today?
Am I muted? I gotta look. Can you hear
No,
me?
you're not now.
Oh, there we go. Oh, there's Linda. Or I mean Michelle.
Oh,
Didn't
well,
mean to call names.
I called Dave Jerry a minute ago, so I guess we're even. Yeah.
That's okay. He's kind of a cool guy, you know.
Yeah.
You see what my name is on my title there?
From the great state of confusion, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
Well, that's kind of the world right now. We're in a great state, and that's exactly what the Bible says. You know, he's gonna, the whole world is gonna be confused. You know, Baruch's talking about people walking through in one country asking another country, "Have you seen any wisdom in your country?" And the other country says, "No, I haven't seen any." And first country said, "No, there's none in me either." They're all confused. But anyway, I think that's where we're headed. There's a lot of confusion going on. But, and again, I'm just gonna, you know, if I'm gonna read from King James in case we post this on YouTube. I don't want anybody saying, "Well, you're reading a different Bible." So, you know, if anybody's coming out of their suffer and seeing anything that's, or Kim, that sounds different than what I'm saying in the King James, go ahead and bring it up. I just don't have enough room in front of me to put them both. I really ought to have them both, but anyway, Romans 9:1. I say the truth in Yeshua, I lie not. My conscience also bearing me witness in the Ruach HaKodesh, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart. For I wish that myself were accursed from Yeshua for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites. And he's gonna start talking about these people as being these Gentiles, but they're still Israelites. And they are Israelites. They're not from Judah. And Israel, that's, you know, when people read Romans, they don't make the distinction between Israel and Judah. They are not the same. Until they all come back together, and then they'll be the whole house of Israel again. But who pertain to the adoption. And we just talked about that adoption back in chapter 8. And Paul was clearly saying that even Paul needed that adoption. He kept saying over and over, we. It was not these Gentile Israelites that needed this adoption. Even Paul, everybody, he was telling Judah as well as Israel that they all needed it. We need the adoption. And the glory and the covenants. And again, that covenants is plural. And so he's talking about all of the covenant. He's talking about that covenant, you know, honestly, going clear back to Adam and all the way through Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you know, in Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. He's talking about all of the covenants from the beginning till that point. And the covenants and the giving of the Torah, and the service of Yahweh, and to the promises. And again, that promises is plural. But what is he talking about the promises? He is going to go back and he's going to quote scripture. They're everywhere. I've pulled up a few that he don't mention, but we'll just look at some of these promises that he's talking about. Ezekiel, well, let's go back to Isaiah 48, 8-9, and look at one of the promises in Isaiah, and need a little bit more room here in front of me. Okay, Isaiah 41, 8-9.
I said 48.
No, I probably did say 48. Isaiah 41, 8-9. Okay. Okay. But thou, Israel, are my servant, and Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend, thou whom I have taken from the ends of the earth and called from the chief men thereof, and said unto thee, Thou art my servant, and I have chosen thee, and not cast thee away. And so again, this is Israel. This is not Judah. And not only is that a promise, but this promise has not even happened yet. This is still a future promise. But that is one of the promises to Israel. And as we look at the world, with all the chaos going on in the world right now, and you let your mind get away from you, what if this spreads? What if this blows up? And I know my kids are all thinking about it, because every one of them's told me, I'm draft age right now. And so you think, we know this time's coming when everything is just going to go crazy. And we've been talking about it, and I hope I'm wrong, but I have a strong feeling that this year is going to get bad. And if that did happen, at what point do you switch over and totally put your faith in Yah and say, you know what? Right now, I would not want my children going to war for President Biden. And this is going to be on YouTube, so I may get pulled down. But I don't, first of all, I don't agree with him. Second of all, he put us in this mess. And third of all, he's not smart enough to get us out of this mess. And I would not want, my nephew just finished his 7th tour, 3 in Iraq and 4 in Afghanistan. For what? So we could leave him a huge military? What did those kids die for? For what? Why did they put their lives on the line? And why would I want my kids to go fight another war like that? I mean, it's not that I'm not patriotic, but I have very little faith in our government right now. I don't agree with what they're doing with our money. I don't agree with what they're doing globally. I don't agree with very much of what they're doing. But at what point do I say, we're gonna go to the wilderness, and Katie bar the door, it's time to go, and we're just going to start believing in Yah at this point. And then, we were talking about in Ukraine this morning. I don't know if you saw that video, Jerry, but I was telling Michelle about it. There were 2 cars going down the street, one car going one way and a tank going the other way. The only 2 vehicles on the road, and that tank swerved to go run over the top of that car, cross 3 lanes of highway to run over the top of that car. That's a war crime. And I couldn't tell
Maybe
if it was,
Biden was in it.
well, he looked like him. He was about his age, and I don't know if it was a woman or a man, but it was an old man or an old woman, and they survived it. They laid over in the seat, and people came and tried to get him out of the car, but it was only about a foot tall. I don't know how in the world that person survived it. But anyway, all that to say, at some point, we're going to face stuff like that. We're going to face a world that is after us, that hot and that heavy, and there is going to be no defense. Our guns, you ain't going to shoot that tank. How are you going to? There's no defense other than Yah. The only protection we're going to have is Yah. And, I've thought a lot about it the last week, that if this thing blows up at some point, your only defense is that pillar of fire and pillar of smoke. And it's only going to be there if you believe it'll be there. And so, we're kind of headed into those times when we need to kind of mentally prepare for, it's going to get dark and it's going to get ugly. And, the first thing that he tells every single time when the people come back to the land, the first thing that it says about him is that he wipes the tears from their eyes. They're going to see a lot of stuff. And, World War II is going to look like a petting zoo compared to what's coming. And, we've been talking about it, and I have mixed emotions about it. But if we're there, we better wrap our mind around what's coming pretty quick. I hope I'm wrong. I truly, truly hope I'm wrong. But we could be walking into that. I think that this fall could be the judgment, when we hit atonement this year, that could be the judgment. That could be Judgment Day. And when we do, the whole world is going to look a lot worse than Ukraine looks right now. I mean, the whole world is going to be at war and on fire and killing each other, and life is going to won't be worth a cup of coffee. But anyway, get back on track. I got on a rabbit trail, but all that to say that this is in that time. What we just read in Isaiah, that is a future event when the world is on fire. That is when he's pulling people, one from a family, two from a town, out of the world and bringing them into a remnant. And so, as we look at the world today, you can sure see it's a tinderbox that it wouldn't take much for that thing to just blow up. But back to the promises that Paul's talking about in Romans, and we could have spent all day on these promises, but I'm going to bring up three, and then Paul's going to bring up some more in a little bit. Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 12. And again, I just grabbed three. I'm not, they're everywhere. But Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 12. Go and proclaim these words towards the north and say, return thou backsliding Israel. And again, who's he talking? He's not talking to Judah. These are the promises he's talking about to Israel, not to Judah. And these are some of those promises that Paul's saying, that he's going to fulfill these promises. And we're going to read it in a minute.
That's right.
Return thou backsliding Israel, saith Yahweh, and I will not cause my anger to fall upon you, for I am merciful, saith Yahweh, and I will not keep my anger forever. Only acknowledge your iniquity, that thou hast transgressed against Yahweh thy Elohim, and hast scattered thy ways to the strangers under every green tree, which we still do every December 25th today. This in modern times, we still do that. And you have not obeyed my voice, saith Yahweh. Turn, O backsliding children, saith Yahweh, for I am married unto you, and I will take you, one of a city and two from a family, and I will bring you back to Zion. Again, that's a future prophecy, but it is a promise to Israel. And that's one of the hundreds of promises to Israel that Paul's talking about. This one just also has not been fulfilled yet. If you go on, clearly it's not talking. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. Clearly it's not talking about Judah. He talks about Judah down below there. But in 15, if you read on, it says, I will give you pastors according to my heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. And you're going to go back to the land. And then if you go on down to 18, he's talking to Judah. He's not talking to Israel. He's talking to the house of Judah. In those days, the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel. Clearly, there was a distinction between the house of Judah and the house of Israel.
That's right.
And there are promises to both, but the promise that we just read was the one to Israel, not to Judah. So those are some of the promises that Paul's talking about. And if we go to Ezekiel 37:11, and I'm just scratching the surface. There are hundreds of them. Excuse me. 37:11, and then we'll jump to 18. 37:11, he says, then he said unto me, Son of man, those bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried and our house is lost, and we are cut off from our parts. That one's a little bit different because it's the whole house of Judah. So he's technically talking of Israel. Anytime it says the whole house of Israel, he's talking about Judah and Israel. The whole house of Israel can be defined as when they're in the land with one leader, And all 12 tribes are reunited. Excuse me. So that's the whole house of Israel. And clearly that is a future prophecy. That has not happened. The leader will be the Messiah. He'll be the king. We will be back in the land, all 12 tribes, Judah and Israel together. And so anytime, excuse me, if it says the house of Israel, it's the 10 northern tribes. When it says the whole house of Israel, every time it ever says the whole house of Israel, it is all 12 tribes back in the land with one king over them. That is the definition of the whole house of Israel. And so clearly that is a future prophecy that in Ezekiel's time that it was gone. In Isaiah's time, it was still going on for a little bit, but it was ending right at that time. And it hadn't happened since Isaiah. So that is clearly a future prophecy in Ezekiel's time. But again, that's a promise to Israel. And if you go down about the two sticks, in 17, let's go to 18 and 19. Excuse me. Boy, I got a frog in my throat and won't go away.
Hey, that's not kosher. Get it out.
It's COVID. I'm done broke the news to everybody up, but it's COVID. I better be careful because I will get kicked off YouTube if I do put this on. Lyndon may not watch it, but anyway, in verse 18, and again, this again is a future promise to Israel, and he clearly distinguishes between Israel and Judah in 18 and 19. And when the children of my people, thy people shall speak to you, saying, will thou not show us what thou meanest by this? So who are the children of those people? Us today. We're the descendants of those people. We're the children down the line saying, well, what do you mean by this? When the church reads it, they still don't understand what that means. But we today are the children, the descendants of those people, and they're asking, well, what do you mean by this? So that's us. And when the children of thy people shall say unto you, will you not show us what you mean by these? Say unto them this, thus says Yahweh Elohim, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim and the tribes of Israel. Ephraim is only the house of the northern 10 tribes. It is not Judah. Judah has no association whatsoever. Judah was Ephraim's uncle. There is no child of Ephraim that is, there's no descendant of Judah that is a descendant of Ephraim. Judah was distinct and separate. Ephraim is distinct and separate. Ephraim is only the northern 10 tribes, which is in the hand of Ephraim and the tribes of Israel. That is only the northern 10 tribes and his fellows, and put them with him, even with the stick of Judah. Judah and Ephraim are totally distinct, different, and it's a house of Israel and the house of Judah. They are not the same. And make them one stick, and they shall be one in your hand. That is still a future prophecy. It's a promise to Israel. It's a promise to Judah. These are the promises that Paul's talking about in Romans 9, just a few of hundreds. And I just picked a few because these are all still future promises. There are some that were fulfilled. Paul fulfilled some of those promises. He was the fulfillment of some of those. When his ministry went to the house of Israel, that was a fulfillment of many of those prophecies. And he's going to bring.
Jeff, where were we in Ezekiel? I'm sorry, I lost my place.
All right, it's 37, and we went in verse 11, and then we jumped on to 18 and 19.
Right, I got it.
So
remember which chapter. Yep, I got it. I flipped the thing over. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. And then later on, Paul's going to pull up some more prophecies that are being fulfilled, and a lot of them he himself fulfilled those prophecies. But anyway, we'll get on into those. So anyway, let's read verse 4 and again and listen to what he's talking about in Romans 9 verse 4. I'm sorry. Who are Israelites? He is not talking about Judah. He's talking about Israelites. Israel and Judah are not the same. And the church reads Israelites and they think Jews. They're wrong. Who are Israelites? To whom pertain the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of Yahweh and the promises. And Paul's going to go on his whole deal all through Romans. He is clearly saying over and over and over, the house of Israel has every right to this covenant. It's promised to them. They're preordained. There's promises that have to be fulfilled. And the promises, whose are the fathers, and of whom concerning the flesh of Yeshua came, is over all, not just Judah, but over all, Judah and Israel. Yahweh blessed forever, amen. Not as through the word of Yah not as though the word of Yah hath taken none effect, for they are not all Israel which are of Israel. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they the children, but in Isaac shall the seed be called. And that's Pigeon's been kind of all over this stuff with Esau and Isaac and Esau or Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and Esau. And he gets into that a little bit, but basically, is Esau the seed of David or the seed of Abraham? Absolutely, Esau is the seed of Abraham. Is Isaac and Ishmael, is Ishmael the seed of Abraham? Absolutely, he's the seed of Abraham. And so are these Pakistani Koalis, are they the seed of Abraham? Absolutely, they're the seed of, I mean, we're all, the world is pretty crazy, but we're all the seed of Abraham. And they know it, that's the whole deal with Islam. They all trace their lineage back to Abraham. It's the split between Isaac and Ishmael is the split between Muslim and Christian and Jew. That is the split, but they're all the seed of Abraham. And that promise goes to Islam. It goes to everybody. Now, not all of them are going to take it, but it goes to them. Let's see, neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they called children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And he's going to go on, well, we'll just read it. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are the children of Yahweh, are not the children of Yahweh, but the children of the promise are counted as for the seed. For the word of promise at this time will I come, for Sarah shall have a son. And he's getting ready to talk about that split between Isaac and Ishmael. And not only this, but when Rebekah also conceived by one, even by our father Isaac. And so for the children not being yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of Yah, according to the election, might stand, not of words, but of him that calleth. It was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger. And so that's exactly what happened. Esau served Jacob and Ishmael served Isaac. The older served the younger. The right-hand blessing went to the older both times. And that was Yah's plan. And that's what Paul's saying. As it was written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And what shall they say then? Is there unrighteousness in Yahweh? Yah forbid. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. Now, the whole point of what Paul's getting ready to say is that the house of Israel, the whole thing that Judah said is they're irredeemable. And Paul is saying, no, they're not. I will show mercy to who I'll show mercy to, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion on. And he clearly says that he's going to have compassion on the house of Israel. And when we get into the end times, does that mean that that Kowali from Pakistan is the seed of Abraham? Yeah, it will. If they accept the Messiah, they're in. That's the only they're into this covenant when they accept that Messiah, and a lot of them will. There are a lot of them that clearly are not. Those qualities clearly say that they're descendant of Moses. You know, they're in Pakistan. They look just like ISIS or the Taliban, but they're not. They look just like them, but they clearly say they're descendant of Moses. And, you know, again, I think I brought it up before, that movie Lone Survivor or whatever the name of it was. When they took that soldier in, they were keeping the law of Moses. They were not going to turn that guy over to the Taliban, and they would fight every man, woman, and child to the death before they turned him over, because he was in a sanctuary city. And that was the law of Moses, and they would not, they would fight to the death before they turned him over to the Taliban. So, you know, they're falling back on the law of Moses when they did that. So then in verse 16, so that then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but Yah that showeth mercy. For the scripture saith unto Pharaoh, even for the same purpose have I raised up thee, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. And again, if we go back to that Gog and Magog, that's going to happen again. I mean, he clearly does that again. The same thing that he did to Pharaoh, he will do to the ruler of Gog. He will put a hook in his mouth and he will pull him into a battle that he will annihilate him. That's exactly what he did to Pharaoh. It's gonna, and I think we could be close to seeing something like that. That this ruler from the north gets pulled into a battle with Israel and gets totally. It says that the Israelites spends, you know, years up, in the desert, marking where all the bones are from the army that that Yah brought in from the north, and totally annihilates them. But that's exactly what happened to Pharaoh. And I think we may be close to seeing something like that happen again in the land. I think we could be close to seeing right now. If you look at Israel, that last skirmish they had just with, you know, was it Hezbollah? They had their hands full just with them and shooting some rockets, and they couldn't stop all the rockets. If they got attacked from every side, there's no way. All at once, and you got Iran shooting stuff at them, and Iraq, and everybody attacking them at the same time. They couldn't handle Hezbollah, let alone, you know, if some of Turkey or Russia or some of these countries from the north come in, there is no way. And that's going to happen. And the same thing that happened to Pharaoh is going to happen again. And I think we're going to see it happen. I think in our near future, we're going to see that happen. And so, you know, what it says, even for this same purpose, I raised him up. So he raised up Pharaoh just to knock him down and to show his superiority to Pharaoh. He's going to do the same thing to this Gog and Magog, you know. And I don't think, like I say, I don't think Ezekiel's Gog and Magog is Revelation's Gog and Magog. I don't think they're the same. If you look at where Gog and Magog, if we'd have just kept reading at that promise that I read in Ezekiel, if we'd have just gone on to the next chapter, that's Gog and Magog. It's right at that time. So I think it, you know, I think it's in our near future. But anyway, therefore, hath he mercy upon whom he will have mercy. But he's saying all this in the context of the house of Israel. He is saying all these things in the context of the house of Israel, that the house of Israel, regardless of what Judah thinks, they are not irredeemable. And he's going to go on to start quoting scripture about that. Therefore, he hath mercy upon whom he will have mercy, and whom he will hardeneth. Thou wilt say unto me, why doth he yet find fault? For who hath resisted his will? But nay, but O man, who art thou that repliest against Yahweh? Who are you to say they're irredeemable when Yah says they're redeemable? He's talking about all these promises that are made. Who are you, somebody from Judah, who are you to say they're not? And that's exactly from verse 1, chapter 1, all the way through chapter 16. That's all he's talking about, is they are not irredeemable. Nay, but O man, who art you to repliest against Jah? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter the power over the clay, and the same lump to make one vessel unto honor, but another unto dishonor? And so, he's going to go on. If we get on to 25, he's clearly going to start quoting some of those promises. What if Yahweh willing, in verse 22, what if Yahweh willing to show his wrath, to make his power known? And I think that's coming. I think that's in our near future. To make his power known, endureth with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction, that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels unto glory. And now he's going to start quoting some more scripture, clearly talking about that there's a reason that the house of Israel rebelled. It was to bring in the whole rest of the world. That was the purpose behind it. He kicked them out so that when they came back, they're going to bring the whole world with him. He had a plan for doing it when he did it. And it was prepared for glory, even though it was harsh on what they did. He kicked them out. They went through a lot of pain when he divorced them, but there was a bigger picture behind it. And that's what Paul's getting ready to talk about. That he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessel of mercy, which he had afore prepared unto glory. So what is he saying there? Even though they dishonored Yah, and even though he divorced them, even though he kicked them out and told them, don't let the door hit you on the way out, he had a bigger picture in mind. There was a purpose and a glory behind it. And the purpose and the glory was to you and I and everybody else on the planet today has a way in now, that the covenant to the whole world would be given. That was the reason for it. But in verse 24, even us who have called not of the Jews only, but of the Gentiles. Again, he's telling these Jews, look, it's not just to Judah, it's to Israel also, and to all the Gentiles. They're scattered to the whole earth, and he's going to bring them all in through Israel. That was the purpose, that was the plan. And if we go back in 23 and look, he's saying that was the plan behind what happened in verse 22. And if you read 23, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy. He had a plan for doing it. He had a reason for doing it. It wasn't for nothing that he kicked them out and divorced them. He did it so that he could bring the entire world back. And that's what he's going to say. Even us who he has called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. As he said in Hosea, I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not my beloved. And it shall come to pass that in that place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there shall they be called the children of the living Elohim. Who are those people that are not his people? They are the house of Israel, plainly. And, we can go back in Hosea 2 and look at it. Clearly, that is not Judah. It is clearly the house of Israel.
It's
Um,
Hosea 1.
Well, 2:23 is where the,
Okay, never mind.
but
Yeah,
I was
I know.
gonna, you know. Hosea, more kept scripting. But again, you know, in the preface and in King James, it clearly says Hosea, son of Beeri, prophesied to the northern kingdom, to Israel. He was not a prophet to Judah. Hosea was a prophet to the house of Israel, Israel or Ephraim, during the time Isaiah was prophesying to Judah. So Isaiah is prophesying to Judah when Hosea is sent to prophesy to the house of Israel. And so at the time Hosea went, the house of Israel had not been kicked out yet. They were still in the land. They were still there, 2,800 years ago, roughly. It was a while before they were kicked out. Hosea went there to warn them, if you don't straighten up, he's going to kick you out. And they didn't listen, and he kicked them out. But he was clearly sent not to Judah, but to the house of Israel. And if you go to 2:23, we're and even in 1, I mean, it's everywhere. You're right, Jerry. In 1, it talks about, where I quit, we were talking about this covenant given to Abraham. And then the covenant went to Isaac. But at the altar, when he was getting ready to sacrifice Isaac, that is when the sand of the sea blessing came in, right there. And this is that sand of the sea. And we're tracing that in that I haven't done my final teaching on, we're so busy, I haven't got it done. But I had one more teaching on this covenant given to Abraham and the sand of the sea blessing. And we're chasing that blessing through, it goes from Abraham to Isaac and then to Jacob. And Jacob actually skips over Joseph and directly gives that blessing to Ephraim, which was not, again, he was not the firstborn, he was the secondborn. So it happened 3 times in a row. Isaac was the youngest, he got it. Jacob was the youngest, he got it. And Jacob passed that blessing, that sand of the sea blessing, straight through to Ephraim, who again was the youngest. He was not the oldest brother. So we're chasing that sand of the sea blessing from Abraham, and clearly here it is. It winds up right here in Hosea in 1:10. Yet the number of the children of Israel, not Judah, shall be as the sand of the sea. That is that sand of the sea blessing given to Isaac. That when we're chasing that sand of the sea blessing, trying to figure out where does it go, it does not go to Judah. It goes to Israel. That sand of the sea blessing goes plainly to the house of Israel. Judah is not the sand of the sea. What are there, 18 million Jews on the planet? And how many, 7.8 billion Gentiles? I mean, we're the sand of the sea, not Judah. And clearly it goes to the sand of the sea. And that was his plan. He knew at Abraham that the house of Israel was going to screw up and he was going to kick them out and boot them out. And he was going to, that sand of the sea blessing was going to go to the entire earth. And then he would bring back anybody that would listen out of that sand of the sea in the end time, that is where we are today. We tell this to everybody we see, but the path is narrow. Most aren't going to find it. Only a remnant. When we get into 10, he's actually that's in, I didn't go that far ahead. It's in 9. He's going to say only a small remnant are going to come back in that from the sand of the sea blessing. We're going to read that here in just a minute. I'm pretty sure that's in 9, so we're going to read it. But anyway, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, not Judah, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it will come to pass in that place where it was said to them, you are not my people. You're right, Jerry. There it shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living Elohim. And then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together. What is that? That's Ezekiel 37:18, right? take for yourself 2 sticks, write one to the house of Joseph and Ephraim and the house of Israel, and write to the other one, the house of Judah. That is those 2 sticks coming together right there. And they will be at that point, we talked about the distinction between the house of Israel and the whole house of Israel. When that happens, that will be the whole house of Israel. That will be all 12 tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and all the other 10 tribes brought back together into the land under one king. Who's the king? The Messiah, Son of Man, put these 2 sticks together. The Messiah is the one that brings them together. So that's those 2 sticks. That's the dry bones coming together. That's exactly. It is not just Judah. Judah is not all those dry bones. They're only a small part of those. The house of Israel is the majority of those dry bones. The 2 sticks are coming together. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together and appoint themselves one head. All right. What does it take to become the whole house of Israel? They have to have a king over them. They have to be all the tribes gathered back together in the land with a king over them. At that point, they become not the house of Israel, but the whole house of Israel. And at that point, Judah is part of it. That's when there's no longer 2 houses. There's only one house. It's not the house of Judah and the house of Israel. It's only the whole house of Israel. And the only time Judah is ever part of the house of Israel is if they put that word whole in front of it. That is the only time Judah ever becomes part of the house of Israel. So they appoint themselves one head. Who's the head? The Messiah, the king, that will reign and rule in the temple that will never be torn down, it says. And it says plainly, I think it's Isaiah, if we'd have read on, it says, your eyes will see the king. Your eyes will see the temple that will never be torn down. When you come back to the land, your eyes will see that Messiah. And it says, I'm going to wipe the tears from your eyes. You're going to see the Messiah, and you're going to go to the temple and look upon the temple that will never be torn down again. And so here's that same story. I mean, it's happening right here. They appoint themselves one head, the Messiah, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. All right, what's the day of Jezreel? What is Jezreel? I mean, Jezreel is Megiddo. Jezreel, the valley of Jezreel, is right above the Tel Megiddo, or right below Tel Megiddo. Where were they told you were not my people? Jezreel, down in the valley of Jezreel. In the place that it was said to you, you are not my people. In that place, it will be told to you, and we'll just go read it in 2:22, I think it is. No, let's see. Yeah, we'll read it. We'll start in 23. And again, I will sow her unto me in the earth. What did he do? Paul is saying he had a reason for this. He's not just a mean old codger that said, you know what, I'm through with you, you're done, I'm divorcing you, get lost. He didn't do this. He sowed the house of Israel into the whole earth. That's what Paul's saying right here. I will sow her. Who's the her? The house of Israel. The one he says he's married to later. I will sow her unto me in the whole earth. He had a reason for doing it. He kicked them out to mix them with the whole world to where they could not distinguish themselves from any other person on the planet. They're just all become one. All the Gentiles become the descendants of the house of Israel. I will sow her unto me. You know, when the Messiah is talking about when you plant a single seed, and it grows, you reap 100-fold. That's what he did with the house of Israel. He scattered her to the earth that he could reap on each one of them 100-fold. That's the harvest, right? That's coming in, and he's telling the disciples the harvest is ripe. He sowed the house of Israel to the whole earth. And here again, this is what Paul's quoting. I will have mercy upon her that have not obtained mercy. Who's he talking about? He's not talking about Judah. He is clearly talking about the house of Israel. I will have mercy upon the house of Israel. I mean, we just read Paul saying that, talking about these promises. These are the promises Paul's talking about, that it's not just to Judah, it's also to Israel, because it's been promised. They're preordained to come back. And who are you, old Jewish man, to say that they're not worthy of redemption? How can you say they're irredeemable if Yah says, I'm going to redeem them? Who are you to say he can't? I will have mercy upon her that have not obtained mercy. I will say to them which are not my people, thou art my people, and thou shalt say, thou art my God. That is exactly what Paul's quoting. That is not Judah. That is Israel. Plainly and totally, it's Israel. And I was trying to think, it's got to be right there in that place that it was said to them. Yeah, Jezreel, we already read it. And so let's go back and read, and you don't have to flip back. I've got it marked here in Romans 9:26. It shall come to pass in that place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there shall they be called the children of the living Elohim. Okay, has that happened? No, that has not happened. Right? Where does that happen at? Now let's go back in 1:11 and let's see where that happened. Where did that happen at? Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together. That's a future event that has not happened. And appoint themselves ahead, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Where was it said to them, you are not my people? In Jezreel. Where will they be told again, you are my people? In Jezreel. That is a future event that has not happened. And it will make totally no sense at all to walk in to Jezreel. When we walk in there, it will be like a death wish. You're going to be walking right into the skillet. I mean, that is Megiddo. You are walking right into Megiddo. And he says, I'm going to bring fire down all around you, and I will not singe a hair on your head. You are walking right into Megiddo. And it will make no sense at all. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Where's the valley of the shadow of death? That's going to be Megiddo, Jezreel Valley. I'm going to, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you will, Yah will comfort me. And I'm botching the quote, but I'm trying to remember it because it definitely is talking about a rod and your staff will comfort me. What rod and what staff? The rod of Aaron and the staff of Moses, which will be in Judah's going to have, I believe, the rod of Aaron, and Israel will have the staff of Moses. I believe that 100%. I think they already have the rod of Aaron. I think they know right where it's at. And I think, and I'm getting off on a rabbit trail, but I think the staff of Moses is going to wind up being in Wales. I think that's where it's at. I think there's a lot of good evidence for that. And there's a lot of history behind those two staffs. The staff of Moses came from the Garden of Eden. It does not get destroyed. The rod of Moses, and you don't hear this story in the King James canon, but Moses got that rod when he went to his father-in-law's garden, and it was stuck in a stone. And I forget which book tells the story. Jerry, is that Baruch? It tells that. I forget. Adam, no, it's Baruch, I believe. But anyway, that's where the story of Excalibur comes from. That staff was stuck in a stone. It had writing on it. And if men tried to pull it out of that stone, they died. And Moses, when he was kicked out of the land, educated by Pharaoh's teachers, priests, he was able to read the writing on that staff. When he got to his father-in-law's house, he could read what that said, and he read it, and he reached out and grabbed it, and he pulled that staff out. There is a long history behind the staff that Moses had. It didn't just, he didn't pick it off the side of the mountain going up when he saw the fiery bush. That staff has a huge past. It was passed on. Jacob used it when he was limping after the angel touched him on the hip. That was the staff that Jacob was using. That staff has a huge, long history, and it will show up again in the end of time. Your staff and your rod will comfort me. They will appear again in the end times. But that's a whole rabbit trail. But anyway, back to Romans 26, 9:26. Well, let's just go back and reread 25 because it should make more sense now. Who's Paul talking about? He is not talking about Judah. Let's read 24. Even us, whom he hath called, not of the Jews only, but of the Gentiles. Why? Why is it of the Gentiles also? Because of the next two scriptures Paul's going to quote. As he says in Hosea, I will call them my people, which were not my people. He didn't do that to Judah. He did not make Judah not his people. Judah have always been his people. They were never divorced. It was only Israel. And her beloved, who was not my beloved. Why are they not his beloved? Because he divorced them, right? It's a heart thing. He divorced them. And it shall come to pass in that place where it was said to them, you are not my people, in the valley of Jezreel. They shall be called the children of the living Elohim. Again, that is a future event that happens in the valley of Jezreel at Megiddo, and it will make no sense at all for Israel and Judah. The remnant of Judah is going to go there too, just like the remnant of Israel, and they're going to meet right there at Megiddo, and it will make no sense. It would, if you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. If you don't care about your life, you're going to save it. That's exactly what's going to be happening in Megiddo. If you're trying to protect yourself, you're going to flee from Megiddo. If you're trying to save yourself, you're going to flee. But if you don't care about your life unto death, you're going to walk right into Jezreel and you're going to save your life. That will be the only, and I think that that's the whole purpose of the teaching behind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Abram and his brother walking through the fire. That he clearly says over and over and over, he clearly says, walk into that fire. I will protect you. I will not send you a hair on your head. I promise you, I will protect you. That's every prophecy about this fire that's coming. That's what he's saying is don't fear that fire. If you're clean, you will not burn. If you are cleaned up, the only thing that will burn you up is if you don't get rid of that sin before you walk into that fire. And now he's going to start quoting Isaiah. And he's going to bring up some more scripture not about Judah, about the house of Israel. Isaiah also crieth concerning Israel, not Judah. If the church could just wrap their mind around that Israel is not Judah. Isaiah also crieth concerning Israel, though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea. That the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved. What did he just say in Ezekiel, right? Or not Ezekiel, where was that? Jeremiah 3. Let's go back and let's just look real quick. I mean, it's all saying the exact same thing. I will take you one, and you don't have to go there. Jeremiah 3:14. I will take you one of a city, two of a family, and I will bring you to Zion. Is that everybody? Absolutely not. It's a remnant. What is he saying here? And Isaiah also crieth concerning Israel, not Judah, that the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. Are they all in just because they're Israel? No. A remnant shall be saved, not all of them, only a small remnant. I will take one from a family, two from a city. Only a remnant. The path is narrow. Most are not going to find it. Just because you're the house of Israel does not mean you're in. You have to come into this covenant. And the path is narrow and most will not find it. Let's just go back. I didn't plan on doing this, but let's just see what Isaiah says about it in 10:22 real quick. Isaiah, you guys don't have to go back if you don't want to, but I just felt the Ruach told me, let's just look at what that says. 10:22. Is that right? 10:22. Yep, Isaiah 10:22. All right. I'm going to go back to 20. Who's he talking about here? Is he talking about Judah? Absolutely not. Isaiah knew the difference between Israel and Judah. He was not. We have this warped 20th century mindset that has a wrong interpretation of Israel. Okay, so I'm going to go back to chapter Isaiah 10 and start in 20. It shall come to pass in that day. In what day? Has this happened yet? No, this is still future. It will come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Judah, where are they escaping? The fire. Right? This has not happened yet. This is a future prophecy. And that's what I'm saying. When I look at the world, y'all's put it on my heart the last few days. You better get your head around what could be. I'm not a prophet. I'm not, I don't know the future. But I feel in my heart like, I see the signs, I see the things happening. We're not children of the darkness. We're children of the light, that this day should catch us off guard. I think it's coming. I have a strong feeling this year is going to get bad. Could be wrong. I'm not a prophet, but I just feel like it is. It shall come to pass in that day. And as we sit here today, this is still a future prophecy, that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped from the house of Jacob. Is there a remnant of Israel who's separating themselves out today? Absolutely. All around the world, there is a group of people all over this planet who are starting to say, wait a minute. This is not what we've been told our whole life. We're Gentiles, but we're Hebraic. We're going back to the Hebraic roots. I mean, there's a whole movement all around, probably the fastest growing religion on the planet. People are returning to the Torah. It shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such that escape of the house of Jacob, escape the fire, this world carnage that's coming, shall no more again stay upon him that smote them. So they're not going to stay where they're at. Somebody's going to smote them and they're going to leave. They're going to be persecuted and they're going to go on the move. But shall stay upon Yahweh. They're not going to stay where they're at, but they're going to stay upon Yahweh. What does that mean? I think they're going to be following a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. I think Joel talks about that. The Holy One of Yasharel in truth, right? They woke up. What is Ezekiel or Jeremiah 16, 16? What does that say? The house of Israel is going to wake up one day and say, surely we've inherited nothing but lies. What's the opposite of that? The truth. What are these people doing? They're waking up and they're going to stay not where they're at, but they're going to stay upon Yahweh, the Holy One of Yasharel, in truth. So they're no longer believing the lie. We did a video on 2 Thessalonians, the great deception. What is the great deception? Everybody's like, well, what's that going to look like? Man, we've been living it for 2,000 years. We are at the very end of the great deception. The great deception is that the Torah has been done away with. That's the great deception. And clearly, Strong's Concordance says that. Brown Driver and Briggs Concordance says that. that iniquity is Torahlessness. They both say that word iniquity, the mystery of iniquity, is the mystery of Torahlessness. Thayer concordance, all three of the concordances that everybody else pulls off of all say the exact same thing, that the mystery of iniquity is actually says, when you translate it, the mystery of Torahlessness, specifically the Torah of Moses. But nobody, even though you show them your own dictionary says that, they still won't accept it, you know. Man, I lost my place. Okay, I get on a rabbit trail. All right. And who is this? Okay, in 21. All right, a remnant. Is that exactly what Paul's talking about? He's talking about a remnant, right? All of them? No, a remnant. The path is narrow. I love everybody pieces, but not everybody's going to find it. I hope they do. I'm going to keep hammering, but only a remnant will find it. The path is narrow and most will not find it. Just because you're in the house of Israel, well, you know, so what? So is 7.8 billion other people. That don't get you in. It's only if you return to the truth, right? It just said that. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, right? Is that Judah? No. I mean, Judah will be a small part of that when they come back together and become that whole house. Judah is one of Jacob's sons, but the vast majority of Jacob's sons are the house of Israel. Ephraim became the vast majority, the sand of the sea. Well, there it is. For thy people, Israel, shall be as the sand of the sea. He is not talking about Judah. Yet a remnant of them shall return. That is exactly the mystery of iniquity. Paul, that's as close to a prophecy as Paul ever comes to. And he's not prophesying, he knows scripture. But he's telling a future event in the mystery of iniquity, that the world will turn away from the Torah. And he knows that's where they're headed. Paul nails it. And he was a genius in scripture. He knew what was coming. Probably from reading some of this stuff, same stuff we're reading. Thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, not Judah, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. What is the consumption decreed? There's a negative connotation to consumption. I haven't looked it up, but it's a negative, that's something negative, that something very positive is going to come out of it. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. Okay. So out of something bad, something good's going to happen. These people that return to the truth are going to overflow with righteousness. What is righteousness? There's really not a good definition in any concordance about righteousness, unrighteousness, but righteousness, it says, is keeping the Torah. So unrighteousness, by definition, has to be not keeping the Torah. So they're going to be overflowing with keeping the Torah. That's exactly what that's saying. Words matter. And, it's been a huge conspiracy over the last 2,000 years to hide that this whole Torah thing. Martin Luther, that was his mission in life, was to show that we were not, it was all about salvation and nothing to do with the Torah. And he did his job very well, because the entire world is following that theology today. But anyway, who's Paul quoting and what's he quoting about? He's quoting about Israel. If we go back and let's just look in Isaiah 11:5. Let's see if that's a fluke. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness in Isaiah 11:5. righteousness. What is righteousness? Keeping the Torah according to every concordance on the planet. It doesn't define unrighteousness, but it does define righteousness as keeping the law of Moses. Righteousness shall be, or excuse me, it's the other way around. I think it defines unrighteousness, but it does not define righteousness. But unrighteousness is not keeping the Torah of Moses specifically. So righteousness is just the opposite. And keeping the Torah of Moses shall be the girdle of his loins and the faithfulness of the girdle of his reins. And what happens next? Right? We all know the next scripture. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatherling together, and the little child shall lead them. Right? When they all return to the Torah, that's what happens. Right? We all know that scripture. But anyway, hey, Dave. A long day in the office.
There you go.
I heard you call the wolf.
Oh, yeah, sure enough, it works too. I'm gonna have to remember that call. We're about to lock it down here, but anyway, we're gonna record this and put it on. I did remember to record this one, and it's gonna be, I think, pretty good. Paul is clearly talking. He's pulled the gloves off. He's clearly talking about the house of Israel all through chapter 9. And he starts quoting prophecies, why they are supposed to come back. And we've spent quite a bit of time on his prophecies and other prophecies. These promises that Paul's talking about. But anyway, we'll go on. Let's see. Let's go back and read 27 again, 9:27. Now that we've read some of Isaiah, what Isaiah said about it, it's going to make a lot more sense. For Isaiah also crieth concerning Israel, not Judah, Israel, plainly talking about Israel. Though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea. He is not talking about Judah. And you can go back, Dave, and look at all that, but it clearly, over and over and over, he's talking about Israel and not Judah. And a remnant shall be saved. And so we, can't drive that home enough. Most are not going to find it. Only a remnant will be saved from this destruction that's coming. And as Isaiah saith before, except the Yahweh of Sabbath have left us a seed. We had been as Sodom. Unless he had left a seed of the house of Israel, the entire earth would be as Sodom. There was a purpose for sending the house of Israel. He planted that seed. That's what he just said earlier. We read that he would put the house of Israel out there as a seed to the whole world so that he could grow or reap a harvest from the whole earth. That was the whole purpose of casting Israel to the nations, was to bring back a seed of everybody on the planet. That except Yahweh of Sabbath had left us a seed, we had been as Sodom. If he hadn't sent them out into the world would be doomed. And made him like unto Gomorrah. If he had not sent the house of Israel into the world, the whole world would be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. There would be no seed coming back, no remnant coming back out of it. That's exactly what Paul's saying. There would be no remnant of the house of Israel if he hadn't scattered Israel to the whole earth. So in verse 30, what shall we say then? That the Gentiles, house of Israel, which followed not after righteousness, have attained righteousness. Even, okay, let's just break that down for a second, though. That's what you got to do with Paul. You got to break every sentence down, right? What shall we say then? That the Gentiles, which followed not after righteousness, right? They did, by implication, they followed righteousness, and then they followed not after it, have attained righteousness, even the righteousness which is of faith. And we just read back in 7, 8, and 9 that, he has a message to Judah also, that guys, you don't need to take your lambs down to the temple anymore and do a sacrifice. The Messiah was the Messiah. And they're taking a leap of faith. Judah is also. I mean, they're still doing sacrifices every day at the temple, but he's telling Judah, you don't need to do it. This was the Messiah, and his blood is worth, it can cleanse your sin better than any lamb. And so Judah is also kind of taking a step of faith. These Jews that know the Torah that he's talking to, he's telling them, you don't have to go to the temple and do sacrifices anymore. So they're taking a leap of faith too. But Israel, which followed after the Torah of righteousness, hath not attained the Torah of righteousness. Wherefore, because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. Who's he talking about? Is he talking about Judah? No. Who is that? That's Israel. What did he just say? Because they sought it. Well, let's go back. But Israel, which followed the Torah of righteousness. You're telling me these Gentiles followed the Torah? Sure they did, until they didn't. And then he divorced them and kicked them out. Right? That's Israel. That's not Judah. But Israel, which followed after the Torah of righteousness. Paul is clearly saying that at some point, they kept the Torah. These are not just barbarian Romans. These are not Persians. They're not somebody that knew nothing about it. Let's go further back. They're not Assyrians. They're not, all the different people that were alive back then. These were people who kept the Torah. Paul is clearly saying, but Israel, which followed after the Torah of righteousness, they kept the Torah, hath not attained the Torah of righteousness. No, they didn't. And they got divorced and kicked out because they didn't. Wherefore, because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by the works of the Torah. And Paul he's going to say all through Romans, he's saying plainly he needs that adoption. Just because Judah didn't get divorced, they need that adoption also. He said 5 different times in chapter 8, we need that adoption, not just Israel, but we need it. And even though they haven't been divorced, they're just as guilty of breaking it as Israel was, because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by works of the Torah. And not until the Messiah comes along will Judah or Israel be able to keep it. For they stumbled at that stumbling stone. There was always something that kept them from keeping it. As it was written, behold, I lay Zion a stumbling stone and rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. And so Paul is basically, he's plainly saying in chapter 8 that even Judah needs a Messiah. They need that adoption as bad as Israel needs it. They can't keep it any better. In chapter 2, he's saying, who are you? Basically, I'm paraphrasing, who are you to throw a stone? Don't you remember we screwed up just as bad as they did? And, there's plenty of scriptures that say it. Jeremiah 3 says, Israel turned away from Yah, and backsliding Israel and her sister Judah saw it. And then Judah went on to do even worse things, but he'd already divorced Israel. He didn't divorce Israel because he was meaner to Israel than he was to Judah. He divorced Israel to scatter them, like he's sowing seed. He's sowing seed to the entire earth so that he can reap a harvest in the end time from the entire, not just Judah and not just the house of Israel that had been, if they would have stayed contained, that's what he said. If he had not scattered Israel to the earth, then the Gentiles would be like Sodom and Gomorrah. There would be no redemption for them. They would burn like Sodom and Gomorrah, and they would have those Romans, those Greeks, all those other people that came after that would have no redemption. He scattered Israel to them so that they could have redemption. And they're clearly the Greeks were descended from the house of Israel. Clearly, the Romans were probably descended from the house of Israel. You know, everybody on this planet, you know, in DNA, that's what they're showing. Everybody, it's almost impossible to go back over 600 years before you don't have a common ancestor with about anybody on this planet. And it's impossible to go back 2,000 years. It's just not possible. Somewhere, sometimes, somebody in your past was a descendant of that house of Israel. It's just impossible that it's not. But anyway, that's chapter 9. And he's starting to clearly talk about that being the house of Israel. He's not, you know, he's not hiding it. The promises he's talking about, he's going back and quoting these scriptures from Isaiah and from, you know, I picked 3 and we went back to Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah. He picked 2. He went back to Isaiah and he went back to Hosea, but they're everywhere. They're everywhere you look. Every prophet talks about them. And we could have spent a week just looking at these promises made that Paul's talking about here. And I guess in conclusion, I feel like what Yah's putting on my heart is, you know, and I'll say I am not a prophet. I never claimed to be a prophet. I don't make any assertion that I just reading scripture and looking at the world. I think it's going to get pretty dark this year. I think that I could be wrong, but I think this thing's going to blow up. I think the world's not going to put up with what Putin's doing. You know, those are definitely war crimes he's pulling. And go ahead, Dave.
I just sent you a video a couple hours ago to our messenger. And from what I'm seeing, it looks like Putin is not the one that's pulling all this. It's propaganda. And I actually saw videos of the Ukrainian military dancing with the Russians that came as their protectors. Because it seems as though what the bombing that Putin is doing is the labs that are in Ukraine that the United States built for these vaccinations and more scientific study of viruses.
That wouldn't shock me a bit. But you look at some of what's coming out anyway, that Putin has desires that if nobody stands up and opposes him, he's looking at Finland, he's looking at some of these other countries as being next on the list if somebody don't stand up to him. And I don't know if that's true. I mean, you don't know what to believe, but I do know, you know, the video of that tank running over that car, that was real.
Yeah.
Car going down the street and that tank was 3 lanes over, there's only 2 vehicles on the road. And that tank turned and just went right over the top of that car. And, you know, that's, if nothing else, the world's seeing that and thinking we ain't going to put up with that, you know. And I don't know, I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm wrong, but I worry that this thing, irregardless of who's doing what and who's pulling the strings, that this thing may blow up. I hope I'm wrong. But
Watch that video and let me know what you think, because I watched several of them from that same person. And there was a lot of stuff about Russia's not the one instigating this. It's American propaganda, because there was also part of that video shows downtown Kiev, what is it, the square or whatever, that supposedly all the rioting was supposed to be taking place and everything. And he was down there and they were home, and they showed going into the stores, and the stores, all the shelves were packed and stuff, not like that they were in emergency worrying about stocking up and all that. So
yeah, there's no telling what's going on. I mean, it really comes down to who's the puppet masters and who's doing all this stuff. My first thought about that is if a missile came in from a destroyer or anything like that, American, into Ukraine, I think Russia would just send them out and send them in return. I could be wrong, but it looks like if anything came in from the outside, I saw Putin out of his own mouth say, if anybody interferes in any way, you're going to meet a full wrath of Russia. And I think he meant it. I think if any missiles came in from outside anywhere, I think he would respond in kind and probably up the ante even a little bit. He'd call them and raise them, I think. But I don't know. I might be wrong. There's no telling. Nothing would surprise me. I think between Biden and Putin, I think Putin's more honest than Biden. I've said that for a while now, and I don't know. You just don't know, and you go back and read that letter. I can't remember his name. That general from the Civil War. He was a Mason, a 33-degree Mason, but he talked about in this letter back in the 1870s how they were going to start a world war, and that they would raise up out of that first world war. They were going to raise up Nazism that they would put down, and they were going to start how they were starting all these wars, and it's pretty much played out exactly like what that letter said it would. And the final one would be they would go in with Israel and go try to take Israel out, the Jews out, and then after that they would try to take out the Christians. Was their final deal. But nothing would surprise me anymore. But I do think, boy, you look at stuff, and I think we're liable to have, for whoever's responsible for whatever, I think we're liable to have $6 a gallon gas pretty quick. I think inflation is already in over 100%. And, I think the stock market's getting ready to go crazy. I think there's a huge bubble that's fixing to burst. Probably 100 different bubbles that are fixing to burst. And I think, it wouldn't take much of a spark to start a world war right now. And, if I did see Putin say that he was not going to allow Ukraine to build a nuclear weapon, and so he was going to take them out before they had the chance. And at that point, that's given Israel a green light to go in after Iran. If it's good enough for Russia, it ought to be good enough for Israel. They can't afford to let Iran make a nuclear weapon. And there's just a lot of stuff that there's a lot of tinder that could catch fire pretty easy, and all it would take is a spark. And
NATO
so,
is not helping that any. So NATO was not helping that any.
no, and neither is our president at
No.
all. And so anyway, that's how we started out today, was looking. And I think what Yaz, the Ruach's showing me right now is, what's happening over there right now is nothing compared to what's going to happen at some point. And if it does happen, is your head prepared? Have you got your head around at some point you're going to, that guy going down the street in that car, he's a little old, I couldn't tell if it was a little old man or a little old lady. And I don't know how they survived it, because that tank was just going down the street and just turned and went right over the top of that car. And it showed him, I think it was a guy, but he was laid over in the seat, and his car wasn't that tall. I don't know how he survived it, but they were pulling him out. But, a gun wouldn't have helped him a bit. How do you fight tanks with fully automatic weapons? How do you fight MiGs? How do you fight them new SU fighter jets they got? How do you fight their drones? How do you fight anything? What I'm getting at, I guess, is that the Ruach's showing me when this thing does happen, and you really need to have your head around the fact that when you make that decision to go to the wilderness, your guns aren't going to protect you no more, not from them. You might keep people out of your food, but not from the world government or the governments of the earth. You're gonna, it's only that pillar of fire and that pillar of smoke that's gonna keep them fighter jets off of you and the drones off of you and the tanks off of you and, you know, all the different artillery and all that stuff they got, you'd never even see them, you know, but you, when that, I'm not a prophet, I don't know when that's gonna happen, but when that does happen, your only saving grace is gonna be Yah, and that pillar of fire is the only thing gonna keep that stuff off of you. And, you know, it plainly says when they stab you in the stomach, it's gonna stab theirself in the stomach. When they shoot you with an arrow, that arrow will come back and hit themselves in the heart. You know, we're not gonna be able to do that part of it. I think we're gonna be fighting, but I think only when Yah tells us to fight, you know, and it's gonna be with his protection. But anyway, I just think that, you know, I think this year is gonna get ugly. I hope I'm wrong. I'm not a prophet and I'm not saying it is, but I think it sure could. And if it does, you know, people need to have I've already told all my kids, if this thing blows up, and every single one of them have come to me and said, you know, I'm draft age. And I'm, you know, here we're gonna probably post this on YouTube. But I may censor a little bit, but I've told every one of them, I would not follow our president across the street, let alone into war. You know, I would not, I don't, he's put us in a terrible place. He's probably a big part of the reason we are where we are today. He is a big part of where we are. I mean, he's made every wrong decision you could make. And I wouldn't follow him, you know, and I wouldn't have said that about any other war prior, you know. I wouldn't have told my kids not to follow it, but I would not follow Biden into a restaurant, let alone in the war. And so I don't know. I just, but it's becoming real enough that, you know, my kids are thinking about it, and it's a, you know, it's a real, and any other time I would have, you know, I'd have never talked them out of fighting for your country. But our country's not what it was 10 years ago. It's not what it was 20 years. It's sure not what it was 50 years ago.
I'll fight for our country, but I'm not fighting for our government.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the deal. I mean, we have a president right now that's paying $350 a head for every illegal immigrant coming across the border from Mexico right now for a motel per day. $350 per person per day. You could put them up in a Hyatt for that. And how many veterans do we have that are living in tents right now? You know, shouldn't that money really go to them? And that's only $350 a day until they can put them on a plane and fly them wherever they want to go in the United States. You know, they won't do that for our veterans that have fought and lost limbs for this country. But
Right.
yet, if, you know, if they can bring them in and cause more chaos, you know, everybody in the United States want them vaccinated unless you're a migrant, and they don't care, you know. It's all about the chaos to them, I think, it's not about keeping this country safe at all. But
Control.
anyway, y'all watch that. We had about 50 people here 2 hours ago for a birthday party, and we just got done with our chores. I had to do them before we did our deal tonight. I was gonna say something, and I don't know, we're just kind of floating it out there, see what everybody feels like. Would it be any better if we did this in the evening from now on, like in 5 in the evening? Is that better or worse for anybody?
5 in the evening for you is 4 here, so that won't make any difference for me if I have to work.
What time would make a difference?
It'd have to be like 6:15 or something like that for you. Would be the earliest I could get here. Well, I'm off the next 2 weekends again, so.
Okay. Well, I was kind of just trying to see what works for everybody. I know Jerry's got a deal. He's hooked up until about 4, right? Usually on Sabbath on a different deal.
4 o'clock in the morning works.
Well, I could do it,
What'd
but I
you
don't know how
say,
many other
Wolf?
people would be there. I don't think.
Yeah, that's 3 for me.
Yeah, I would lose Lynn on that one probably.
But if David, if it would work better for Wolf, gotta have that dialect. If it worked better for Wolf to be at 6 or 6:30, I'm okay with that. That'll work for me.
Okay.
And like I said, I can catch, it's only 2 weekends a month at this point, but they haven't opened up that other position to put applications in for yet, so. What's that? And we have an event next week, so we probably, well, next week I won't, yeah. So next week I probably won't be here anyway.
Okay, well, I'm pretty easy. I can do it whenever works for everybody. I think Linda's pretty easy. Normally she can do it about any time, but if it would help, we could do it at 6:15. We could do it in the evening, and if that would help sometimes for you, we could do that. Or, I'm, like I say, I'm easy. As long as we start before sundown, which I think we will be. Our days are already, it's already after 7 before the sun goes down now.
Well, I think for the sake of inviting new people and whatever else, I don't know if you're still sending my mom email links and stuff like that or not, but the more standardized you keep it, the more likely people are gonna
Afternoons.
jump in, and I think afternoon it probably is the smart play. As far as that way, I mean, and it's all dependent on you too. I know you're getting busy on stuff, spring coming around and animals and all that stuff.
Well, once we get our corrals done, my life's gonna loosen up a little bit. We haven't even done a video for 2 weeks now because we just so busy. Between.
How much time you got left on your corrals?
I was hoping tomorrow I'd get some help and would get it finished tomorrow, but I don't know. Casey's got, they're opening that shop up Monday in Keys, and he's got a body man going in there Monday. He's already got jobs lined up, so he's got to have that done tomorrow for his body man to start. So I don't know if he's going to be able to help me tomorrow or not. If we got 2 welders and 3 guys, I could have it done in a day. But it may just be me again tomorrow. I don't know. I'm hoping I get at least one other welder and another helper.
Next Sabbath, don't you have to go to Woodward?
Yeah, I do. Actually, next Saturday on the Sabbath, I've got to go. I may not be back. I've got to run to Los Santa Fe, I guess, next weekend. And I may be getting close to you, Dave. Well, I don't know. We were looking at a car down there. Where was that at? But I think it sold. But anyway, it was getting close to your part of the world. But if I did, I thought I might swing back up through Quamada, and that's good. How far are you from Quamada? You told me before, and I forgot.
Oh gosh, it's 3 or 4 hours or something like that, probably.
That's getting close anyway. Yeah, I don't know.
What are you looking at a car? What are we talking about?
Oh, it was a 68 Cougar. I'm pretty sure it sold, but it was a steal. They only wanted 3,000 for it, and it was in good shape. But I think I can't find it now, and it probably already sold. I did buy a 71 Torino station wagon yesterday, and bought a bunch of pickups yesterday. But anyway, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to make it, but I got totally off script. I do have to go to Santa Fe next Sabbath. What I might do, if it would work for everybody, and I could do this at any time on a Friday night. I don't know that I'm going to be around during the day on Sabbath on Saturday at all, but I could do it Friday evening. Because I think by the time I get to Santa Fe and back, it's liable to be too late. But anyway, I'll see if that'll work for everybody. I think that's going to be the only shot I'm going to have next week is on Friday night, after sundown, we'll do it, because I don't think I can do it at all on Sabbath day. But anyway, I don't know if Kim sent a link to your mom. I was out doing chores and she sent the links out, and then I
don't
came in.
know. I just sent them to who I knew was going to be on, and I'm sorry if I missed somebody.
Okay, but anyway, we'll definitely post this one tonight.
I didn't know if you had like a group built up, you just push send and it goes to all of that particular group or what?
We do, but I need a tech guy in here to show me how to do it. I got to do them one at a time and click on them every time. But really, I guess Jerry's telling me we don't really have to do anything, that it's the same link every time. So if everybody just saves their link, you can pull it up through that link, same link we send out every week. If you'd save it, you can pull it up every week from that.
I hadn't noticed that.
But anyway, it's no big deal to send them out every week. But anyway, so I'll tell you what, I'll send out, we'll see when we get a little closer. I think this guy, I've got to be there on Sabbath day, I think. But when we get a little closer, I'll find out for sure and send out messages to everybody. And if we need to, we can do it Friday evening on the Sabbath after sundown. If I have to, we can do that. But anyway, if you want to go look, give me about an hour, hour and a half, and I'll have this one posted on YouTube, just for a Sabbath meeting for today. And so if you want to go back and look at it, it really is pretty good. It sure covers a lot of ground about the house of Israel and the remnant and who they will be in the end times. And so,
Well, if that link is the same, maybe you could even post that on the thing on the YouTube.
yeah, I probably could. I just need somebody smarter than I am about how to do all that stuff. You show
Well,
me
it's too
how
bad
to
I'm not a little closer. I know how to throw some sparks on steel too, so
do what?
that's too bad I'm not a little closer. I know how to throw some sparks at steel too.
Well, yeah. Well, Bo would know all that. I just need to get him up here to show me how to do all that stuff. But anyway, we will post this one tonight on YouTube. It'll probably take an hour and a half to render it, and then we'll put it up. But anyway, guys, I don't want to keep you. Jerry looks like he's froze there. I don't know if that's a still photograph or if his computer froze, but anyway, we'll get off here and let you get some supper, and in about an hour and a half we'll have us up, and sometime through the week if you get time. It ought to be pretty good. It covers a lot of good ground. But anyway, well, I'll let you get off here so you can eat your supper, and I still got to go take a bath and do a few more chores I didn't get done. So, but anyway, guys, we love you guys, and you take care, and we'll let you know. Probably going to be Friday evening next time, but we'll let you know definitely when and how to do it. But anyway, well, late shalom and Shabbat, and we'll see you guys next week then.
All right,
Shalom
so-
spot.
All right, you guys take care.